You're listening to The Portfolio Composer, hosted by me, Dr. Garrett Hope, where business and creativity go hand in hand. Join us at theportfoliocomposer.com for news, talks, and workshops. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Dorico Pro 3 is a major new version, with game-changing advances in note input, notation, and engraving. Also available from Steinberg is Dorico Elements, an entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show. Welcome to the Portfolio Composer, where creativity and business go hand in hand. I'm your host, your coach, and your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I'm so excited you've tuned in again today to listen to this episode. Today's episode is with composer Jason Graves. Jason is a two-time British Academy Award-winning composer. He's renowned for his textural concept scores and innovative orchestration in cinematic narrative games such as the Dark Pictures Anthology, Moss, Tomb Raider, Far Cry Primal, Until Dawn, The Order, and others. He's also working on TV and film projects. He's doing so much. He studied at USC under film composers Jerry Goldsmith, Elmer Bernstein, and Christopher Young. He's a classically trained instrumentalist and composer. This guy brings a lot of chops to the table. And what's great about this interview is we go deeply into the concept that you're playing a long game. He uses an investment strategy that your career should be a long stock market holding strategy because you have to build the returns and the dividends if you want to have a successful career as a creative and as a composer. All right, enjoy. Jason, welcome to the Portfolio Composer.
Garrett, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I actually spent this afternoon listening to the Moss soundtrack, and man, that's some good stuff there.
That's so great to hear because a lot of times, especially if I'm doing an interview or if someone comes up to me at a conference and they say, oh, I just spent, the last week listening to, and I'm waiting for them to fill in the blank of some, horror soundtrack. And my immediate reaction is always, oh, geez, I'm so sorry. But with Moss, I can just say thank you. And that was such an amazing project to work on. It was so wonderful writing, well, dare I say, pleasant-sounding music for a change.
Okay, we got to dig into that.
Sure.
I don't know your catalog as deeply as I probably should, but then you must have pretty extensive horror genre stuff in your catalog.
I think it would be easy to say that the horror music is sort of what put my name on the map. Now, I don't know if it's because the game was big, it's called Dead Space, or if it's because the game was big, it was a scary game, and my last name is Graves. I sort of feel like all three of those things kind of... I'm not kidding either. I really do think it was one of those things where there were all these interviews and articles, a composer named Jason Graves. They did the same thing when I did Tomb Raider. Like, oh, are you obsessed with death? Your last name's Graves, Tomb, and Dead Space. And, it just happened to be my first big project that got a lot of attention, both because the game was great, Dead Space, and the score got attention because it was so scary. And at the time... very different. I just did a 20th century, like neoclassical kind of score. But since then, I have done a lot of other scary textural games by extension.
What's funny about that is the town I grew up in Colorado, had a dentist named Dr. Beaver. So sometimes these things are just serendipitous.
Definitely.
Jason Graves, composer of horror and action music.
Hey, guess what my older daughter wants to do when she grows up?
I have no idea.
She's going into the funeral sciences program at a school nearby, and she's going to, own a funeral home.
No way.
Wow.
Okay, more power to her, right?
I know.
There's a lot of business there. People die every day.
The Graves Funeral Home. Come on.
I know, right? It's meant to be. That's fantastic. So tell me what made Moss so great to work on.
I think mostly it was because I grew up, and when I say grew up, I guess I mean in middle school and high school, and then especially in college, I was listening to and also trying to write music in this kind of instrumental, new agey sort of style. And you have to understand, this is like late 80s to mid 90s. So new age was sort of a big thing at the time.
Lots of Enya.
And I loved the instrumental music, but I couldn't compose classical music. I wasn't like a Beethoven trying to do a symphony on the piano or something. And jazz was still very foreign to me, just being a drummer. So new age I could really hone in on. And I just loved, noodling around with my computer and my MIDI keyboard, doing, quote unquote, pretty music, like the kind of stuff that my mom liked to listen to. I would write a song and she would say that she liked it. My dad as well. But video games, there are opportunities for that, but, not as much on the kind of bigger game scope. And especially someone with my track record, I don't think that I know I wasn't really the ideal candidate to score this project.
Okay, wait, stop. What do you mean you weren't the ideal candidate?
Polyarc, the game company, didn't have a choice. They didn't have someone specific that they wanted. They just called my agency and said, hey, we really need a composer. We're doing this game. It's set in the forest, and you're this little tiny mouse, but you also interact with her, and it's very personal and very relatable, and it's more like ambient, relax, puzzle solving and exploring kinds of things. It's not the traditional type of video game, and it's in VR, so it's more of an experience. I mean, literally, you could just sit there for 2 minutes and just kind of look around and listen to the sounds and listen to the music. And she said, I know exactly who you need. Jason Graves is your person. And the audio director literally laughed and said, I'm sorry, it's not that kind of a game, because of all the other things that I've written. But she's known me for probably 10 years now, and she knows the stuff that I really, if I'm going to write music on my own, by myself, just for kicks, Moss is the kind of stuff that I would do. And she knew that. And she thankfully, took a risk and put me forward, and I wrote some music for them, and they loved it. And then the rest is history.
That's fascinating. So it's great that you have an agent in your corner kind of going to bat for you, even when you didn't know you needed someone to do that. You know what I mean? She created this opportunity.
Absolutely.
How did you get to the point of working with someone like that? I mean, a lot of composers wonder, like, well, should I get an agent? Or how does that even work?
She approached me after an article in Variety came out. And this is after the first Dead Space. Everything's going to lead back to that first Dead Space game. It came out in 2008, so literally it came out 12 years ago. But she saw the article and she just emailed me and said, hey, I heard the music for your game and I think it's amazing. We should talk. I feel like we could do something fun together. And that was basically it. Now that sounds super simple, but I was in games for 8 years before that. And I think I already had 30 or 40 games under my belt. And I had an agent representing me previous to that. This was just sort of kind of the step up, the next level. This is the agency that represents John Williams. So It was a big opportunity.
So she saw you in the media, Variety, and then followed up. That's amazing. What does an agent do for you besides maybe it's just create opportunities. What benefit are you getting from this relationship?
So this is tricky because different agents do different things, and sometimes there can be a bit of a blurry line between what someone would consider an agent's responsibility and what someone would consider a manager's responsibility, and what someone would consider maybe a publicist's responsibility. And I can understand from the outside, trying to look in, they sort of all kind of seem like maybe they're the same thing. I've never thought, and I'm sure that Cheryl Tiana is her name. She works at Gorfain Schwartz. I'm sure Cheryl would back me up on this. Her job is not to get me work. She wasn't out there actively talking to developers, and she happened to talk to Polyarc, and she said, hey, do you need a composer for your game? And they said, why, yes, we do. People contact her and ask for her opinions and ask maybe for her to suggest some composers that may be appropriate. I'd say probably a lot of the times people contact her and say, hey, we want X composer and you represent them. What do we need to do to get the ball rolling? So I think, and I'm pretty sure that Cheryl would agree with me, an agent's responsibility is to manage work. It's to handle the legal side of contracts and negotiations. And for me personally, a lot of the business minutia that not only do I not concern myself with that much because they are representing me, but I also get a little lost in it sometime. And I'm talking about the 40, 50, 60-page contracts with all the legal stuff. I'm not talking about the kind of business stuff we're going to talk about. I think it's important for a composer to be mindful and aware of what's going around, with their business. But the contracts especially, and the whole legal thing, and having to change little clauses here and there and all that stuff, they take care of all of that. And it doesn't cost me anything extra if it literally takes them 6 months to hammer out a contract with maybe a really big developer, or usually what it is, the really small developers take a long time just because they don't have a lot of experience doing contracts.
Sure.
So they're more of a managerial kind of team. Now, that doesn't mean, like with Moss, if someone just says, hey, we need music for our game, she's going to recommend whoever she thinks is, number one, a good fit, and number two, can actually handle the workload. So it's sort of the icing on the cake than the actual cake itself, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense to me. It's interesting that she's acting kind of as the management part of it too, rather than just strictly the gig-based side of the business, right? With the contracts and everything too. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a secondary thing that just naturally happens. You know, by no means is she, like, if I'm going to a big conference, she's not making phone calls and setting up meetings for me and, you know, making sure my hotel room's set and, you know, taking me to lunches. And that's more of a manager kind of thing. She's not doing that. I'm doing all of that stuff myself. Now, I could call her or email or text and say, I'm going to this big conference and I want to meet some people. Who should I talk to? Maybe she'll give me some suggestions for people, but that's not really her job. Her job is to take care of the business that comes in, right?
Right. Yep.
She's working with the business that has come in naturally, either by her own recommendation or someone just calling and asking for me.
Makes sense. One thing you just said, going to conferences and trying to do that networking side of things. But you don't live in a major media hub. You live in North Carolina. So how do you make that work? How do you balance the investment in your career, because going to these events is not cheap, with your time and everything else?
Well, it's always a balance. As a matter of fact, I was texting with my publicist not 30 minutes ago, trying to figure out if I'm going to do this conference thing that's overseas this year. Even when you have, you know, the money in the bank that is allocated for business expenses, you know, for traveling or for anything like that, it's still not easy to figure out when to travel, when not to travel. You know, there's always upsides to going, but there's also always downsides. The first and foremost being you're not in the studio working. So if I'm going overseas, we're talking 7 to 10 days of a commitment, and that's 7 to 10 days music isn't getting written.
Right.
But regardless of that, I honestly still feel like I'm handling, or at least thinking about, that sort of stuff that you just asked about the exact same way that I was 20 years ago. It's just now it's not, well, I can't do that because I can't afford it. That was an easy answer in the beginning. I couldn't afford to fly to San Francisco and spend 3 days going to the Game Developers Conference, which is sort of the biggest conference in the world, especially now. 20 years ago, it was still sort of up and coming. So I had to save some money, and then I think I went like 2 years later or something like that. It's easy to say you can't put a price on FaceTime and being in front of people and getting to know people, but you can. It's the price of a plane ticket, a hotel, food, and everything else. And if you're talking about going to a big city, even within the continental United States, I mean, thousands of dollars are being spent to do something like that.
Oh, easy.
You know?
But that will pay dividends to you in the long run, right?
Yes.
That'll turn into opportunities and relationships.
But the hardest thing about that is I would say most of the time, it is not instant rewards. It's a long-term stock market kind of investment where over the years of consistently showing up at whatever conference that you're going to, or the multiple conferences you're going to, you're getting to know the other composers, you're getting to know the audio directors, you're getting to know all the other people that are kind of in the same boat as you are, whether they're working in music or not. You're all learning, you're all getting older together, and it becomes a touchstone. You know, the industry is huge, but it's not that huge. I mean, I think I probably personally know the audio directors that are working on, you know, half of the big games right now. I'm not working with them. That's not what I'm saying, but I know them personally. 20 or 25 people, male and female, because we either worked together in the past and they've gone on to something else, or they were best friends with someone that I was working with and we hung out, or they were doing sound effects implementation back when I was doing the music 15 years ago, and now they're an audio director. It's all about the connections, and it's hard to make a connection online. I mean, you can do it sometimes, but in person, if you're one of those outgoing kind of happy people that likes to get to know other folks and make them feel welcome, then it's a complete no-brainer. I understand that it's a bit of a challenge when you're not as outgoing Fortunately, I've never had that curse. As you can tell, I have no problem talking.
Okay, two things I want to follow up on. So first, let's rewind a little bit. You said that 20 years ago, you would say to yourself, I can't afford that. What do you say to yourself now?
Well, actually, I say I can't afford that the same way, except I'm talking about time and not money.
So a different kind of expense.
Exactly. The conference that I was referring to earlier that I've been texting with my publicist about is in Europe this year. Well, it's in Europe every year, but for me, it would mean going to Europe this year. And, it's a day to get there and it's a day to get back. You got to be there a couple of days before the jet lag is over. And then the conference is a couple of days. And if I'm going to take all that pain and suffering to fly over there and back, I'm going to spend a couple of days and see the town that I'm in. So really, like I said, 7 to 10 days. And especially right now, I'm doing a lot of television. So for me, anything before April is just a no-go because it's not like a game or a film where if I just put it off 2 weeks, it's no problem. I can pick it up when I get back. With TV, it's literally, business gone. They've gotten someone else to write the music. And so not only am I not making money, I'm actually losing money, and then I'm spending it while I'm gone. So it sort of turns into time and money to a certain extent. That's granular. It's really more about the time for me and the lost time not in the studio.
That makes complete sense to me. All right, the other thing I wanted to follow up on was the idea of doing these things while living in relative isolation. Because you literally just said that the FaceTime is more important than building relationships online, but it's expensive, both monetarily and time-wise, to go and get the FaceTime. So how did you make that jump? How have you built a career while living where you live?
Well, the first thing I started doing, now I'm a lot closer to 50 than I am to 30. So when I was starting this, we're talking mid-90s. So the internet wasn't really a thing, like at all. I started working locally, not just with game companies, with anyone that I could basically get to listen to me. And I was doing newsletters. I mean, I'm kidding you not. Printed out like single page, double-sided newsletters that fold up and has the address like on the middle when it all folds up. I was doing corporate work. I was doing radio work. I was working with local game companies. I was doing all of that local work because I couldn't afford to go anywhere. And they were here. So business, for a year and a half or 2 years, I was the member of some sort of a startup business thing where I was the only one there doing music. Everybody else was doing, they're trying to get their interior design business up and running. Nothing to do with what I was doing, but doing to network things with other people like that, going to small local conferences where you're learning about kind of how business works and that sort of a thing. I was just getting to know people, and someone would know someone else, and I was just doing networking on a very basic local level. And then there's also IGDA, which is for games. It's kind of everywhere, all over the world. So there is a local chapter here that sometimes is in the town that I'm in. Other times it's an hour away or maybe 2 hours away. But I was going to all of those as well. And I would speak occasionally, but mostly it was going just to listen to the people talk and kind of hang out and meet folks. And I can't stress enough what I wasn't doing. Now, I had a business card, but I didn't have it. I mean, it was like in my wallet. I wasn't walking around shoving my business card in people's faces, introducing myself and telling them what I did and asking them if they needed music for their commercial game, whatever that their business was. Mm-hmm. I was getting to know all these folks as people, right? Even though I was probably 10 years younger than most of them, I was doing my best to sort of relate to them and get to know them on a personal level. And then the relationship is more than just, trying to squeeze money out of them because you want to write music for them. It's about getting to know them. And, I had a couple of jobs from local companies where after a 20-minute, 30-minute just getting to know these people, they'd be, oh, well, I got to tell you, Jason, I got nothing. Absolutely nothing that I could use you for. Because these meetings and these conferences, little small things, were all about networking and trying to get each other to find work and all that.
Right.
But a couple of times they said, but I do. My brother-in-law has an XYZ, or my best friend runs this recording studio that's only 45 minutes away from here. And there was all those just small networking things. Before I was doing games more or less full-time, which I did a run of for about 15 years, I've diversified since then, and we can talk about that later. But before I was in games full time, I was doing anything that I could get my hands on, whether it was recording political radio spots or working as an assistant engineer at a recording studio or doing commercial like library music stuff for people to use, companies around town that couldn't afford original music. I was anything, recording bands. I was doing anything that had to do with audio or music. So not only was I learning how to network and talk to these people and getting to know them and kind of figuring out who was who around town, but I was also learning, well, how to record a band or how to talk people through dialogue sessions, how to help with a producer when the voiceover doesn't quite work and rewrite the dialogue, and all this very kind of feather in your cap sort of thing where it's just it's like a snowball going down a mountain. It's cumulative. And because of that, because of microphones, I've got like 20 microphones around my studio all the time now because I feel so comfortable recording things and I know what the microphone sounds like and which pre I'm going to use on which instrument. And it's just a cumulative event that is so much more than just networking and getting work.
Right. This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
I'm Nathan Howe. I do mostly choral music because of flows, because it thinks in flows. I spend so much less time trying to get those things to appear naturally on the page and to work together to flow right into each other in Dorico. Maybe I want to add an extra beat. In other programs, if I do that, I break a lot of things and I have to go do a lot of cleanup. Dorico will automatically adjust note lengths. It knows that that note goes for a certain duration, and it'll give me the best look for that duration based on the presets that I've told it to do. When I'm writing for piano, the way Dorico handles voices is so good because so often you don't need a voice for very long. You need it just for, a suspension that happens in the right hand, and then you don't need that voice for the rest of the piece. You can turn it on and off at will, and you don't have all these rests hanging out that then you have to hide. You can just start the voice where it starts and end it where it ends, and it's done. I can compose in Dorico. For me now, I compose directly into Dorico more often. I still use pencil and paper once in a while, but I'll compose into Dorico because my workflow is fast enough that it can keep up with what I want to do. It's faster for me than writing it out longhand to start. Yes, I recommend Dorico. Overall, it's the most natural music notation software I've used, and my workflow is just so much faster than it was with other software. I started with the first, 1.0 or 1.1, and the growth in Dorico over that time has been tremendous. I love how responsive the developers are. I'm not only excited about using Dorico now, I'm excited to see how it develops over the next few years because it's active development, which I don't see other places.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to www.steinberg.net/TPC. Okay, so if I'm going to draw two lessons out of what you've been saying, the first is you started locally, and the second is you invested in relationships first, not trying to get the next gig.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as you describe this, you're building relationships, getting to know these people as people without making the ask, like hire me kind of thing. And that's always the hardest part. As I'm working with other composers and coaching them in their career, they want to know, well, how do you really build a relationship? How does it work for you? Are you kind of the introverted type, or are you very comfortable in a room full of people and introducing yourself to strangers?
I don't particularly love... Okay, this is where it's weird. Because if I go to the grocery store and my family's waiting in the car because I'm just running in to grab something, I'll pop back in the car and I'll go, I just met this guy and I'll give him a 5-minute story about like this guy's dog and how he did this and how he did that. I have no problem talking to people like that. What I do not enjoy doing is there used to be a long time ago at this game conference, they'd have these sort of high pressure like speed dating kind of things where the whole point was you give them your business card, you tell them what you do, and you try to sell them on why you're the person to do your job, like why they should hire you for whatever it is you're doing. In our case, it's music. That I did not enjoy whatsoever. I think because it wasn't natural. So I'm very outgoing. I love talking to people, and I've found over the years that I'm very sort of empathetic to whatever it is, their story and their life and stuff like that. But I'm extremely sensitive, I think almost to a negative point, talking about myself. Like, the music that I've written or the awards that I've won, I've never done that. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that I just don't feel comfortable talking about myself in that way. I'll talk about my family and my animals and my equipment and my, maybe something I'm working on right now, but it's more of a natural flow of conversation, not a let me tell you what I can do for you salesman kind of thing. That's what I don't like.
Right. I just had this image of you walking into the room, and on your name badge it says award-winning composer Jason Graves.
Yeah, right.
Kind of goofy, right? I know composers who might do that, and you probably do too.
And I have to say, there's nothing wrong with that. I think if you've won an award or if you've been nominated for something, you should be proud of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can't explain it. My mom's really mad at me because I've got this studio and I've got these like plastic, big Tupperware bins with all these awards and little statues and things. And she wants me to put them out on the desk. And why aren't your BAFTAs over here? It's not that I'm not proud of the fact that I won BAFTAs or whatever the other things are. I guess I just don't dwell on that. I'm more concerned about the music I'm writing right now and what I'm going to be writing tomorrow and what I'm doing in the future and the people that I'm working with than I am what's happened in the past.
Sure. I kind of want to try to dig into a little bit more of your process as you're having conversations. Do you have any tricks to get conversations started with people you're just meeting at a conference? Let's say this is someone you've never met before, but you just got introduced to them through a mutual acquaintance. What kind of conversation starters do you pull out?
Well, for me, and I'll stop saying, that I'm not thinking about the business side of things. I think you've gotten that down. It's the exact same conversation I'd be having with the guy that was telling me about his dog at the grocery store.
Okay.
Because I think that one started out, he had like milk bones and mayonnaise or some weird combination of just like two things on the little conveyor belt that he was buying. And I think I looked over and I said something like, either you've got a dog or you're in for a really weird dinner or something like that. And he laughed and started telling me about his dog. So it would be something like if someone introduced me, I would probably make a comment about something that I observed, either from like the t-shirt that they were wearing, or maybe the person introduced them and told me where they were from, and I have been there, and I would comment on that, or I haven't been there, and I'd say, I've never been to fill in the blank. Like, is that near anything that maybe I like their shoes? Maybe they have like a cool necklace on, or maybe they've got some cool earrings that my wife would like. It usually just ends up being out of just naturally wanting to know more about them because we're talking. Something personal and something that I'm trying to just learn more about them, And if they start talking, I have a lot of animals. If they start talking about their pets or their kids now, because I've been networking and doing all this stuff for 20-something years, as soon as you find common ground, 30 minutes can go by and you realize that you're thinking like, this seems like a really cool person. I'd like to hang out with them. And we're at a conference doing games. Oh my gosh, we might be able to work together on something.
Right.
But that's never the point. It's always something personal.
I really like how you said that. I don't know if you've read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, but one of his main points is to be the most interesting person in the room, you need to be the most interested.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you just described.
Yeah.
You're interested in them. You don't go out broadcasting yourself. Instead, you're a sponge saying, tell me more about you. And I love that.
I think as long as you're coming at it from an honest, personal kind of level, then you're doing well. And if you're nervous and you've not done it before and you've got a little mental checklist of things to do, I think that's good too, because you're still coming at it from an honest, personal, relatable level. You're just don't have enough experience to just do it naturally yet. I think it's when people have an agenda up front, and I don't mean the way we just talked about it. A natural agenda is good. Being interested, wanting to be interested is good. Just having an agenda to push, like I'm going to ask them 3 questions about themselves, then I'm going to tell them about me, and maybe I can get some, that's always the wrong way to go about it.
It's not going to work.
And I know that's not what the book you talked about was saying. If it's natural and heartfelt, You know, there are people that I know that are, maybe my daughter's parents. One of them, for example, is a therapist. She's the sweetest person in the world. And whenever we leave, like dropping each other's houses with the kids or something like that, I always just think like, she's just so sweet and she's so nice. And I realize that being a therapist, her job is to be interested in people, right? So whenever I see her, she always has some little compliment she gives me one way or the other, and she's not doing it on purpose. There's something, and halfway through she'll just comment on, well, we all don't have cool shoes or something like that, or just some little something. And she's always asking me questions about, well, how's work going? And are you still doing TV stuff or whatever the last tidbit that she had from my wife that I was working with. And just those two little personal things just automatically just make me think, along with her aura and the way she carries herself and everything else, she's just a super nice person, and I enjoy spending time around her.
That's a good lesson, actually. We want to be super nice people and interested.
And like I said, I'm incredibly empathetic. I pretty much say to people what I would want people to say to me. I know I treat people the way I would want to be treated. I could never... To a fault, again, my friends will roll their eyes and go, "Oh, we know you can't say anything negative about, XYZ." I'm like, "What? I think they're great folks," or whatever it is. But yeah, I think, actions speak louder than words, but words mean a lot.
Yeah, they do. I want to jump back into something that you kind of touched on a few minutes ago, because you said that you diversified your activities to make money.
Yeah.
And like I was describing before we started recording, the idea of the whole podcast, the name of it, comes from the idea of having a portfolio of income-generating things we do as composers. So we all compose, so we get commissions, but we also have royalty income, score sales, recording sales, licensing, we teach, whatever. So I'm interested, what is in your portfolio, and can you describe the evolution of your portfolio, kind of what you were hinting at?
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned writing commercial library music back when I was making all those local connections. And my first sort of portfolio investment was almost accidental because I had built up hundreds of songs that were library cuts. So there was, like 2 different or 3 different 30 seconds, a couple of 60 seconds, stingers, full versions, no melody mixes, bed mixes, the whole thing whenever I did a track. Mostly at the time, because I would have a company come to me and say, basically we have 20% of what you would charge us for writing original music, whatever it was back then. I honestly don't remember. But I would say, you're in luck, because for that 20% of what I originally would have charged, I can give you these 2 songs, and I can actually sort of, edit them a little bit because I've got the stems. And that was how I did, maybe a third of my business back in the day. So fast forward probably 8 years, and again, through just networking, I ended up knowing a guy in California from when I was living in California for a few years who was doing music library stuff. And it was basically an exclusive representation, and this is going to spiral downhill really quick, but it was an exclusive representation with the Discovery series. This is back in like the mid-90s, early 2000s. And all the songs would basically get thrown into their sort of needle drop fees, which is exactly the way I was charging for it, except you didn't make any money off the needle drops, but what you got was back end. I had done nothing with the music for probably 3 or 4 years and had no desire to go back and start listening to that stuff again. Like I said before, I'm not a backward-looking composer. I'm very much focused on moving forward. So I was like, what have I got to lose? Take it. Take all of it. And I started getting revenue from royalties about a year later. And it wasn't, it wasn't a lot. I don't remember, but I'm sure it was probably, hundreds, like $500 or $700 every quarter from the royalties. But that was, $500 that I literally did nothing to make. The music was going to go nowhere without their assistance. And it's just been growing and getting bigger. That was 15 years ago. And now it's a lot more than that. I mean, it's easily 10 times more than that every quarter. And that's probably the smallest number because I keep adding to it a bit at a time as I can. So that was sort of my first thing was just BMI, which is who I'm with. and having the back end on all that stuff. This was all the Discovery Channel shows, all the reality TV stuff. I did a bunch of reality TV when I lived in Los Angeles, and I got the writer's share for that as well. So that was sort of the beginning.
And you were able to maintain ownership over your rights of the pieces when you were doing this media work?
So the media work, when I was using the songs, personally, that was beforehand.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, I think it was non-exclusive for like 5 years, now that I'm talking about it. It was non-exclusive for about 5 years, and I thought, sure, what have I got to lose? And then after 5 years, Disney bought them, and they wanted it to be exclusive, but they were also going to keep the same licensing deal, same back end, and it was going to like 20 more channels or something like that. And by then, that is when I hadn't used it in forever. And they didn't care about local. It's not like this music had been used when I was doing it on anything other than incredibly local kind of platform. There was no national, let alone international usage. So it was, again, just a no-brainer. Now, fortunately, I am not one of the guys that's been actively composing for the Discovery Networks who's now getting all of my royalties pulled or replaced with previous shows and all that ridiculous stuff that's just an absolute sin to all the poor composers. And I'm including myself in that gets so little back end as it even begins. But I've experienced way too much of that before, both in TV and in like trailers and commercials where the director or the producer basically puts their name on the cue sheet instead of the composers. And it hasn't happened to me personally, but it's happened to people that I've been working with. And it's just like, oh.
Yeah.
Because, they're stuck. Either they walk away or they take it. And I know one time a guy walked away and he never worked with the guy again. Not that he wanted to, but he didn't have any work for a couple months and it really hurt. But then he got work again and he's like, it's the best decision I ever made because I'd be stuck, giving all my writer's shares away to this director because he wanted to put his name on the cue sheet. But some other composer agreed and let them put his name on the cue sheet. So that's what I meant by the downward spiral. I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but fortunately, like I said, not personally experienced with the recent Discovery nightmare, but man, I feel bad for all the ones that are.
Yeah, that's terrible. Well, I understand that Discovery Channel is just kind of making that a policy, but you got to lay that out in your contract too. Be absolutely clear about who's going where and who gets what.
Yeah, that's another nice thing about agents. They're very, very much concerned about, all of those things that maybe even as a young composer, you're not even completely aware of your legal rights and what possibilities there are and things like that. I think Cheryl said she spends most of her time talking to the video game companies about royalties because it's just a completely foreign idea to them. Video game companies like to own everything because they want to close the book on that project and be completely done with it. And then any sales, there's no paperwork, there's no extra keeping track of anything, and this person gets a percentage and all that sort of stuff. It's changed a little bit, but usually with royalties, with games, soundtrack sales, absolutely. Any back-end sales on sheet music or performances and all that stuff, no problem whatsoever. Points on the game, that doesn't happen very often. I've had one game that did that, and it was a small game, but it's still an evolving industry. I mean, it's like the film industry in the 50s. If you want to count like the late 30s and 40s as kind of film coming of age and the golden age of Hollywood.
Sure.
Games on this scale have only been around for the last 15 or 20 years. So it's no wonder that it's still kind of the wild, wild west in terms of licensing and back end and royalties.
Yeah, it's still evolving, which is interesting. One of the questions I like to ask the people who are on the podcast, the guests, is for one actionable piece of advice. So for the composers who are listening, what's one thing they could do today to help move their career forward?
If I had to pick one thing, I would say don't limit your focus to one specific notion. Meaning, don't think, I want to be a film composer, or I want to be a video game composer, or, dare I say, I want to be a composer in general. The wider, kind of more shotgun approach you can get to work, the more work you're going to get. And I would include, implementing sound effects, recording sound effects, recording voiceovers, recording bands. Now, see, this is what happens when you ask people's opinion. All I'm doing is telling you what I've done in the past.
Well, that works, right? Success leaves clues.
Right. And I got work. I was being paid to do all of these different things. And it all not only paid the bills, but it also educated me and all became part of who I am today. And I've done sound effects recording for games and implementation as well. I've done music implementation for games. The more you know, the more you do, the more likely you are to get a job and the better looking you're going to be to a prospective employer, especially in video games, because so many jobs are kind of being done by a single person with a small company. You know, one employee is wearing 3 or 4 hats.
Yeah.
You can have an audio director that's literally the sound effects editor, the music supervisor. They're doing everything. Maybe until the very end, they'll bring in a couple of people to help. But there's a lot of great opportunities if you learn something like Wise and how to implement audio, meaning music, voiceover, and sound effects. Well, all of a sudden you're being asked to record some voiceovers and you need to take these sound effects and you go, it's like, it starts one little seed, blossoms into this whole huge thing.
Yep. Well, that's a great piece of advice. Jason, this has been a really fascinating conversation for me. I've enjoyed picking your brain about how you've built your career and your experience, especially the networking. I know you kind of feel like, well, this is just what I do, but there's going to be at least one person who listens to this and they can say, you know, I think I'll try that. And that's what I'm hoping for, because like I said, success leaves clues. And the best way to build your career is to examine the lives of people who have done what you want to do. So I want to thank you so much for your time and speaking with me on the podcast.
Oh, totally my pleasure. There's some great questions. I hope so too. It's really hard. You can't think, well, what would I think 20 years from now about how I ran my business? You can only look backwards. So
Yep.
Being able to talk with, old folks like me, hopefully will give some younger folks a few ideas.
Yeah, that's the idea. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoy listening to this, and I appreciate everything you had to say.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Be sure to go to theportfoliocomposer.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm sending weekly emails called the Friday Five that discuss interesting things to help you jumpstart your weekend and hopefully provide better insight into certain aspects of your business. And if you're interested in participating in some of my coaching, I'm doing a group coaching program right now that is walking people through changing their thought process and seeing the opportunities around them and not being controlled by fear, doubt, and anxiety and worry. Go to forward7steps.com and you can sign up for that coaching and get started today. I've even got an optional book club, study club that you can participate in, and we're changing lives. We're making a difference. I'd love to see you in the group. So that's forward7steps.com. This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in 2 versions. Dorico Pro for professionals, and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days. By downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.